I've been with Sarah for almost 10 years. We met in college, both fresh out of our teenage years, and fell head over heels in love. I thought we were solid, you know. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but I believed we had built a good foundation. But looking back, I realize I was blind to the cracks forming beneath the surface. It started with small things, distant texts, late nights at work, and a sudden interest in her appearance. I brushed it off as her just trying to stay healthy or maybe going through a phase. What husband wouldn't want their wife to feel confident, right? In the months leading up to the discovery, the signs started to pile up. She became more secretive with her phone, seldom letting it out of her sight. If I walked into the room while she was texting, she'd quickly lock her screen, tossing me a half-hearted smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I noticed she'd changed her hair color, something she hadn't done in years. I told myself she was just trying to rejuvenate herself, but deep down, I felt something was off. I'll never forget the day. It all came crashing down. It was a typical Tuesday evening and I was at home working on some reports. Sarah said she had a dinner with some friends from work. I was okay with it. She had a right to her social life. But something gnawed at me. Maybe it was just my gut instinct trying to scream at me. After she left, I decided to take a look at her Instagram, something I'd rarely done. That's when I stumbled upon a picture of her laughing and cozying up with none other than my father's friend, Mark. My heart raced. I was in disbelief. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or just sit in shock. Mark was 5 years older than me, a family friend who had always been like an uncle. My mind spiraled into chaos as I tried to process what I was seeing. I looked deeper, scrolling through her posts and realizing they'd been together for weeks. I felt the betrayal cut deep. That night I waited for Sarah to come home, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to confront her, but I was terrified of what I might hear. When she walked in, there was a gleam in her eye, a kind of triumph that made my stomach churn. I had made dinner to keep things normal, but inside I was a storm of emotions. I casually asked how her dinner went, trying to mask the turmoil brewing inside me. "Good, Mark is hilarious," she said, taking off her jacket. I felt my face flush with anger. "Oh, really? I saw the pictures," I blurted out, my voice trembling with rage. Her face fell, the color draining from her cheeks, and I knew I had her. "Those were just for fun," she exclaimed, her voice rising defensively. The denial hung in the air like a heavy fog. She tried to laugh it off, but I wasn't in the mood for her excuses. I demanded the truth, the whole truth. Then the floodgates opened. She tried to play it off as innocent, a flirtation that meant nothing. But I could see through her lies. My heart felt heavy with every word she spoke. I wanted to believe her, to give her another chance, but it was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. I felt rage boil inside me, and it was uncontrollable. I couldn't believe Sarah would stoop so low, especially with someone who was supposed to be family. The anger morphed into a cold, calculated resolve. I decided then that I wouldn't let this slide. I would expose Mark and ensure he lost everything: respect, reputation, and maybe even his marriage if he had won. This wasn't just an affair. It was a betrayal that went deeper than I could have imagined. It was time for justice. It was time for me to take charge and show them both that actions have consequences. I didn't know exactly how I would do it, but I was determined to make them both pay. As I settled in for the night, my mind raced with plans. I needed to gather evidence, talk to a few friends, and figure out the best way to expose Mark for the cheating bastard he was. I wouldn't let my heartache be in vain. The thought of his downfall sparked a grim satisfaction within me. I felt like I was finally regaining some power over my shattered world. I was no longer just the wronged husband. I was going to be the architect of my own revenge. Part of me felt guilty, but the larger part was driven by the need for justice. I told myself that this was not just about me. It was about showing them both that they couldn't get away with tearing apart lives for their selfishness. I was ready. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. I felt like I was living in a fog, going through the motions of daily life while plotting my revenge in the shadows. I went to work, nodding and smiling at my colleagues, but inside I was a volcano ready to erupt. I sought out subtle opportunities to gather evidence about Mark and Sarah's affair. I couldn't just confront him without proof. I wanted to ensure that when I exposed him, it would be undeniable. I started by reaching out to a few close friends. I was careful not to reveal too much too soon, but I let them know that I suspected something was off with Sarah. It was crucial to have allies who could support me and help me navigate this treacherous path. My friend Mike was particularly helpful. He had known both Sarah and Mark for years and had a keen sense of people's true intentions. He was skeptical at first, but once I showed him the incriminating photos I had found, his demeanor shifted from disbelief to concern. "I can't believe she would do this to you, man. Mark, that's low," he said, shaking his head. "What's your plan?" "I want to expose him. I want him to lose everything, his reputation, respect, maybe even his job," I replied. The thought rolled off my tongue with a bitter satisfaction. "Are you sure you want to go that far?" Mike asked, concern etched on his face. This could get messy. I shrugged. "I've already lost my marriage. What more do I have to lose?" The truth hit hard. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff and I was ready to jump into the unknown. With Mike's help, I began to gather more evidence. We started by discreetly talking to people who had hung out with Sarah and Mark. It was a risky game, lurking in the shadows while trying to piece together the truth. I learned that they had been spending time together more than I had initially thought. Few friends mentioned seeing them together more often, and the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. Each revelation fueled my anger. It was like pouring gasoline on an already raging fire. I also began to watch Sarah closely. I paid attention to little things, how she reacted to my questions, the way she avoided eye contact when I brought up Mark. Each day felt like a ticking time bomb as I waited for the moment to strike. My heart would race every time I thought of confronting Mark, and I pictured the look on his face when I unveiled the truth. One evening, I decided to follow Sarah. It was a risky move, but I felt compelled to gather more direct evidence. I waited until she left for another dinner with friends, a phrase that had become a red flag for me. I got in my car and trailed her, keeping a safe distance. My heart raced as I kept my eyes locked on her car. I could feel the tension in the air, a mixture of adrenaline and dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to uncover something that would solidify my plan for revenge. After following her for a solid 20 minutes, she pulled into a bar that I recognized. It was a popular spot, known for its live music and vibrant atmosphere. I parked a few blocks away and watched as she entered. My stomach twisted as I imagined the laughter and flirtation that awaited inside. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures of her walking in, her hair flowing behind her, completely unaware that I was watching her every move. I sat in my car, the anger boiling inside me. Just then my phone buzzed. It was Mike checking in. I texted him back, letting him know where I was and what I was doing. "Stay sharp. I'll be nearby if you need backup," he replied. I appreciated his support, but I had to do this myself. I didn't want to look weak or unstable in this moment. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to go in. I walked up to the entrance, my heart pounding. As I stepped inside, the music blared and I scanned the room. There she was, sitting in a booth with Mark. They were laughing, leaning in close, sharing what looked like an intimate moment. I felt the heat rise in my chest. I wanted to scream, to confront them right then and there, but I knew I had to be smart about it. Instead, I took a moment to breathe, to collect myself. This was what I had been waiting for, the moment that could solidify my opportunity for revenge. I pulled out my phone again and recorded a short video, capturing them in their moment of betrayal. After a few minutes, I slipped out of the bar, my mind racing. I had the evidence I needed. As I drove back home, I felt a sense of empowerment that I hadn't experienced in days. I was no longer the victim. I was the one in control. When I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling of triumph. I knew that I had to confront Sarah with this evidence. It was time to turn the tables and show her that I wouldn't back down. I decided to give it a day to gather myself before the confrontation. After all, I wanted to come in strong, armed with indisputable proof of their betrayal. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to make sure she understood the gravity of what she had done. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, just as I had felt the heart-wrenching pain of betrayal. I went to bed that night with a sense of determination. I would plot my revenge carefully, ensuring that when the time came, it would leave a lasting impact. I was ready to face both Sarah and Mark, and I was going to make sure they would never forget what they had done to me. The next day, I woke up with a clear head. It was time to execute my plan. The day of reckoning arrived, and I could hardly contain my anticipation. I spent most of the morning pacing around the house, contemplating how I wanted to approach the confrontation. I had the video evidence securely saved on my phone, ready to unleash it at just the right moment. I decided to wait until that evening when Sarah would be home from work. I wanted her to be in a more private setting, where she couldn't escape or deflect my questions. As the clock ticked closer to her usual arrival time, I felt a mix of anxiety and excitement bubbling inside me. When Sarah walked through the door, she was humming a tune, seemingly in a good mood. I forced myself to appear calm, greeting her with a smile that felt more like a mask than anything genuine. Inside, my heart raced. "Hey, how was your day?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the tension in my voice. "Not bad, a bit busy, but you know how it goes," she replied, tossing her bag aside and heading to the kitchen. I followed her, steeling myself for what I was about to do. "Can we talk? I need to discuss something important." Her expression shifted, the cheer fading slightly. "Sure, what's up?" I took a deep breath, my heart thumping like a drum. "It's about you and Mark." Instantly, her face paled. "What do you mean?" She stammered, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I pulled my phone from my pocket and pressed play on the video. The screen lit up with images of her laughing and flirting with Mark in that bar. I watched as her expression changed from confusion to horror in a matter of seconds. "Sarah, how could you?" I said, my voice steady even as I felt the rage bubbling beneath the surface. "You're with my father's friend. How could you betray me like this?" She opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't form. I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she struggled to come up with an explanation. Finally, she blurted out, "It's not what it looks like. We were just having fun." "Fun?" I scoffed. "You call this fun? This is betrayal. You've been lying to me for weeks, and I have the proof right here." Her eyes darted from the screen back to my face, desperation etched on her features. "Please, just let me explain. It was a moment of weakness. I was feeling lost, and Mark was there for me." "Lost?" I shot back. "You were married. You were supposed to be there for me too. What you did is unforgivable." "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "It just happened. I didn't want to hurt you." "Too late for that." "Sarah," I replied coldly, "you've already done that. You shattered whatever trust we had left." I felt a wave of anger wash over me, and I struggled to keep my composure. I wanted to scream at her, to make her feel every ounce of pain that I felt, but I knew that would only give her the opportunity to deflect blame. Instead, I remained calm, collecting my thoughts. What hurts the most is that it was Mark, my father's friend. You knew how much he meant to me, and yet you still chose to betray me with him," I said through gritted teeth. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to find the right words. "It didn't mean anything, I swear. It was just physical, nothing more." "Just physical," I echoed, incredulous. "This isn't just some random fling, Sarah. You made a choice. You made a conscious decision to cheat on me with someone you knew I trusted." I was confused, and Mark was there to listen. She responded, desperation creeping into her voice. "He made me feel wanted." I shook my head, feeling my heart harden. "You don't get to play the victim here. You had options. You could have talked to me. You could have come to me for support instead of betraying me, but you didn't." I know, I messed up," she cried. "I'm so sorry. Please, can we work through this?" "Work through this?" I said, incredulous. "How can you even suggest that after what you've done? There's no way I can trust you again, not after this." Silence filled the room, the weight of the truth hanging heavily in the air. For a long moment we just stared at each other, the reality of our situation sinking in. "You need to leave," I said finally, my voice steady. "I can't look at you right now." "Where will I go?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Honestly, that's not my concern anymore. You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences." With that, I turned away from her, trying to quell the storm of emotions inside me. It felt surreal to stand there, knowing I had finally confronted her, but the pain was still fresh. I could feel my heart shatter into a million pieces with every passing second, but I held on to my resolve. Sarah stood there, utterly lost, tears still flowing as she realized the gravity of her actions. I felt a mix of anger and sadness wash over me, knowing that this was the end of our life together as we once knew it. I stepped outside onto the porch, needing the fresh air to clear my mind. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm golden hue over everything, but it felt like the end of an era. I knew this was just the beginning of the fallout. Mark would pay for his betrayal too, but right now, I needed to process what had just unfolded. I felt a strange sense of liberation mingled with heartache. I had confronted my wife and exposed her infidelity, but it came at the cost of everything I had once held dearly. Now, it was time to execute the next phase of my plan. I wasn't going to let this go unpunished. Mark would learn that there were consequences for his actions, and I would make sure he felt the full brunt of the betrayal he had committed against me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the storm ahead. The emotional roller coaster was far from over, but I was ready to take the next step in reclaiming my life. The road to revenge was just beginning. The days following the confrontation with Sarah felt like a blur. I had told her to leave, but she didn't actually go anywhere immediately. Instead, she opted to sleep on the couch, a decision I didn't understand but didn't care to confront. I needed space, time to think, and I certainly didn't want to deal with her excuses or pleas for forgiveness. I spent countless hours replaying our argument in my head, battling with the emotions that coursed through me. I felt anger, sadness, and betrayal all at once, and it was exhausting. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved, had become a stranger overnight. I felt hollow. I had lost my partner, my confidant, and I was left with nothing but the remnants of our shattered relationship. In the midst of all this turmoil, my thoughts constantly drifted back to Mark. I could hardly believe he would do something so low, so despicable. He was supposed to be a family friend, someone I had looked up to growing up. The betrayal felt like a double-edged sword, cutting deep in both directions. I couldn't wait to confront him and expose the truth, but I also felt a sense of dread creeping in. I decided to plan my approach. My first step was to gather more information about Mark, to see if there were any skeletons in his closet that I could use against him. I reached out to a couple of friends who might have insight into his life. What I learned was shocking. It turned out that Mark had a reputation for being a womanizer. Several people shared stories about his affairs and how he had mistreated women in the past. It made my blood boil to hear that he had been doing this for years without consequence. I felt a sense of vindication. I wasn't the first man he had betrayed. Once I had this information, I felt stronger. I decided that I would not just confront him. I would gather evidence of his past infidelities and present them to his wife, if he had one. I needed to ensure he felt the weight of his actions, just like I had. I began to compile the stories and rumors I had gathered, creating a small dossier of his past indiscretions. When I was ready, I called Mike over to help me execute the next phase of my plan. He arrived and I laid out my findings. "This is the plan," I said, my voice steady. "I want to confront Mark with this evidence and make sure he understands that his actions have consequences." Mike nodded, clearly on board. "I think it's a solid plan. Exposing him will not only hurt him, but also send a message to Sarah that you're not to be trifled with." I felt a grim satisfaction at the thought of Mark's downfall. The very idea of showing him that he couldn't escape the repercussions of his choices filled me with a sense of purpose. I wasn't just a victim in this scenario. I was taking back control. We set a date for the confrontation. I wanted to do it in a way that would ensure maximum impact. I decided that I would invite Mark out for drinks, making it seem casual while also making sure I had witnesses. It would be a public setting where he couldn't easily deny or deflect the accusations. The night arrived, and I felt a mix of nervousness and excitement as I met Mike at the bar. We arrived early and picked a booth where we could watch the entrance and be unobtrusive. I ordered a drink, trying to calm my nerves while awaiting Mark's arrival. When he walked in, I felt my pulse quicken. He was dressed sharply in a button-up shirt, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit him. I signaled him over and he joined us, flashing his usual charming smile. "Hey guys, what's up?" he said, jovial and relaxed, oblivious to the brewing tension in the air. Just catching up, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. Got a few things I wanted to discuss with you, Mark. Sure, what's on your mind? He asked, taking a sip of his beer, clearly not sensing the gravity of the situation. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. Let's talk about Sarah. His demeanor shifted immediately, the smile faltering as he realized this conversation was not going to be light-hearted. What about her? I know about. Your little rendezvous, I said, my voice low but solid. You think it's okay to betray me with my wife. You think it's okay to destroy a marriage. He feigned confusion, but I could see the panic creeping into his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, but I wasn't about to let him deflect. Cut the crap, Mark. You were with her. I have proof, I said, pulling out my phone and showing him the video I had recorded. And I know that this isn't your first time screwing around. I've heard the stories. His face went pale as he watched the screen, and I could see the realization of his actions dawning upon him. Look, I can explain, he said, his voice shaking slightly. Explain? What's there to explain? I shot back. You made your choice. You threw away any chance of decency when you decided to sleep with my wife. You're a coward, and I'm going to make sure you face the consequences. At this point, I could sense the tension in the bar around us as other patrons looked on, curious about the scene unfolding. I knew that this was my moment. I needed to make it count. People need to know who you really are, I continued. I'll be sharing this information, and I'll make sure everyone knows about how you've betrayed me and countless others. You've built your life on lies, and it's time for those lies to come crashing down. Mark's expression shifted from shock to anger, and he leaned forward, his voice low and threatening. You think you can just ruin my life like this? You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. I felt a surge of adrenaline rush through me. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm not backing down. You chose this path when you decided to betray my trust. Now you'll face the fallout. I glanced over at Mike, who was watching the exchange intently, ready to step in if things escalated further. I could see that Mark was weighing his options, and for a fleeting moment I felt a sense of satisfaction at the unease etched on his face. Get out of here, Mark, I said firmly, my voice unwavering. You've lost my respect, and I won't tolerate your presence any longer. Consider this a warning. He stared at me, the anger still simmering beneath the surface, but he knew he was outmatched. With a huff, he stood up, straightening his shirt in an attempt to regain some semblance of dignity. This isn't over, he muttered, his voice barely audible over the noise of the bar. Maybe not, I shot back, but it will be for you. Consider it my promise. As he walked away, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had done it. I had confronted Mark and exposed his betrayal. I had taken back control of my life, and it felt liberating. Mike turned to me, a grin on his face. Damn, man, that was intense. You really showed him. I nodded, still processing what had just happened. I needed to make a statement. He can't just walk away without consequences. The evening ended on a high note, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I knew this was just the beginning of the fallout, but for the first time in a while, I felt like I was reclaiming my life. I learned that standing up for yourself and confronting those who betray you could lead to a sense of empowerment. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was taking charge of my narrative, and nothing felt better than that. As I left the bar, I felt lighter. I still had a long way to go, but I was ready to face whatever came next. The aftermath of my confrontation with Mark was a whirlwind of emotions, but I felt a strange sense of clarity. I had put my foot down, and now I was determined to see this through. With Mark's reputation and his actions firmly in my sights, I began reaching out to those in our social circle. I couldn't let this go unpunished. I devised a plan to ensure that the truth would spread, and I would make sure that Mark suffered the consequences of his actions. The thought of his downfall was intoxicating, and I was fueled by a newfound sense of purpose. I started with a couple of close friends who knew both Mark and Sarah. I knew they would be supportive and help spread the word. I shared the details of the affair, the video evidence, and Mark's past indiscretions. Their reactions were a mix of shock and disbelief, but they quickly rallied behind me. I can't believe he would do this to you, one friend said, shaking his head. I'll make sure to tell others what he's really like. With each conversation, I felt the weight of my pain begin to lift. I was no longer the victim. I was the one in control of the narrative. The more people I spoke to, the more empowered I felt. Word began to spread quickly, and soon I found myself in conversations that I never thought I would have. People were genuinely horrified by what Mark had done. I learned that many had suspected his infidelities over the years, but no one had ever gathered the courage to confront him. As the gossip spread through our community, I felt a surge of satisfaction. I wasn't just taking revenge on Mark. I was also holding him accountable for years of deceit. I could see the shift in how people perceived him. He went from being a charming family friend to a man whose actions were scrutinized under a critical lens. But the fallout didn't just impact Mark. I also began to notice changes in Sarah. She was desperate to get back together, constantly sending me messages filled with apologies and pleas for a second chance. I was overwhelmed by a mix of emotions at first. Part of me wanted to believe that she was genuinely remorseful, but I knew better. Trust had been shattered, and there was no way to rebuild what was broken. At one point, I decided to meet her for coffee. I wanted to give her the chance to explain herself one last time, even though I had already made up my mind. When we sat down, the atmosphere was thick with tension. "I'm really sorry for what I did," she began, her eyes pleading. "I made a terrible mistake and I never meant to hurt you. I just got caught up in things." I listened quietly, my heart hardening at her words. "Caught up in things? You slept with my father's friend. You chose to betray me, Sarah. That's not just a mistake, it's a conscious decision." "I know, I regret it every single day," she insisted, tears pooling in her eyes. "I wish I could take it back. I miss you so much. I love you." "I don't want to hear that," I replied firmly. "Love doesn't betray. You destroyed everything we built together, and I'm not going to let you waltz back into my life as if nothing happened." Her expression shifted from desperation to anger. "You're being unreasonable. You can't just throw everything away because of one mistake." "Unreasonable? You think what you did was just a mistake? How many times did you lie to me before it all came crashing down? How can I trust you again after this?" "I'll do anything to earn back your trust," she shouted, but I could see the cracks in her facade. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "You need to understand that this is bigger than just us. You made choices that affect more than just our relationship. You've hurt me in ways I can't even begin to explain." I watched as her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. But then I reminded myself of the betrayal that had cut so deep. I wasn't going to let guilt sway me now. "I think it's best if we go our separate ways," I said, my voice steady. "I don't want to revisit what we had. It's over." Her face crumpled, a mixture of heartbreak and anger etched into her features. "You'll regret this," she spat before walking away. As I watched her leave, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. I had made the right decision, but that didn't make it any easier. I had lost someone I thought I would spend my life with, yet there was a part of me that felt free. With Sarah out of the picture, I focused entirely on the fallout from my confrontation with Mark. I learned that he had faced backlash from others in our community. People reached out to me with stories of their own encounters with his dishonesty, and I knew I had made the right choice in exposing him. One evening, I received a message from an old colleague of Mark, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "I heard what happened with you and Mark," she wrote. "I wanted to let you know that he's been dishonest in his professional life too. I think you should consider sharing that as well." Her words were like a light bulb going off in my head. I realized that exposing Mark's infidelity was just one aspect of his character. He was a man who seemed to have a penchant for deceit in all areas of his life. I began reaching out to contacts in the industry Mark worked in, sharing the information I had gathered about his behavior. It didn't take long for the news to circulate, and I could see Mark's reputation crumbling around him. As the weeks passed, it became clear that my actions had repercussions. He began to lose clients, and I heard whispers that he might even face disciplinary action at work. I felt a sense of vindication with every piece of news I received. The fallout was swift and decisive. Mark's world was collapsing around him, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I learned that justice doesn't always come in the form of legal repercussions. Sometimes it comes in the form of social accountability. I had taken a stand not just for myself, but for everyone who had been hurt by his actions. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I felt a mix of emotions, but mostly I felt empowered. The betrayal had been painful, but it had propelled me into a journey of self-discovery. I was no longer defined by the hurt. I was reclaiming my narrative. I realized that moving forward wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to embrace whatever came next. I was determined to rebuild my life piece by piece, and I wouldn't let betrayal define me. With a sense of hope and resilience, I prepared for the next chapter. As the dust settled from the fallout of my confrontation with Mark, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, anger, and an unexpected sense of liberation. I had taken decisive action, not just for myself, but for others who had been wronged by him. It was incredible how much power I had discovered within myself amidst the chaos that had engulfed my life. Days turned into weeks, and I was amazed at how swiftly my life began to change. The burden of betrayal that once weighed heavily on my heart started to lift, and I felt lighter than I had in months. I began to focus on myself, my well-being, and my aspirations. It was time to rediscover who I was outside of my relationship with Sarah and the chaos surrounding my marriage. I started spending more time with friends who had supported me through this ordeal. We went out for drinks, attended local events, and even took weekend trips. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of camaraderie and joy that I had almost forgotten existed. My friends became my support system, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this world. One night, while out with Mike and a few others, I found myself laughing and genuinely enjoying the moment. I felt a spark of happiness that I hadn't experienced in what felt like an eternity. "You know," Mike said as we clinked our glasses together, "you've handled all of this with so much grace. I admire how you took charge." "Thanks, man. It wasn't easy, but I realized that I had to stand up for myself," I replied, feeling a swell of pride. As I navigated my newfound freedom, I began to reflect on what I truly wanted in life. I had spent so many years focused on my relationship with Sarah that I had neglected my own dreams and aspirations. I decided it was time to take a leap and prioritize what brought me joy. I had always wanted to travel, to explore places outside of my little bubble. So, I started planning a trip. I researched destinations, looked into flights, and made a list of places I wanted to see. The idea of embarking on this adventure filled me with excitement. I felt invigorated by the prospect of experiencing the world without the weight of betrayal holding me back. In the midst of my planning, I made sure to stay informed about Mark's situation. I learned that he was facing serious repercussions at work due to the fallout from my revelations. Clients had pulled away, and he was under scrutiny for his past actions. He had become somewhat of a pariah in our community, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. He was finally facing the consequences of his choices, just as I had promised myself. One evening, I received a call from a mutual friend who had been in touch with Mark. "He's really struggling," she said, her voice tinged with sympathy. "I think he's hit rock bottom." I paused, conflicted. Part of me felt a flicker of empathy, but the larger part of me remembered the pain he had caused. "He made his choices," I replied, my voice steady. "This is the consequence of what he did." "True, but people can change," she suggested. "Maybe he needs help." I considered her words for a moment. Perhaps people could change, but I wasn't in a position to offer forgiveness or compassion. I had fought hard to reclaim my life, and I needed to remain steadfast in my resolve. As the weeks went by, I embraced my journey of self-discovery fully. I found a new rhythm in my life, one that was filled with purpose. I took up new hobbies, signed up for a cooking class, and even started volunteering at a local charity. I wanted to give back to the community, to connect with others, and to find fulfillment in ways I hadn't imagined. With each passing day, I felt more like myself. I was healing, learning, and growing. I realized that betrayal, while painful, had propelled me into a new chapter of my life. It pushed me to confront my own worth and to understand that I deserved better than what I had experienced. Eventually, I booked my trip, a 2-week adventure to Europe. I was excited and nervous, ready to embrace the unknown. As the departure date approached, I packed my bags with a sense of enthusiasm that overshadowed any lingering sadness. I was ready to embark on a journey not just across the world, but also into a new phase of my life. On the day of my departure, I stood at the airport, a mix of excitement and nerves swirling inside me. I took a deep breath, acknowledging how far I had come. I was no longer defined by my past. I was stepping into a future filled with possibilities. As the plane took off, I looked out the window, watching the ground below disappear. I felt a sense of hope wash over me. I had turned a painful chapter into an opportunity for growth. I was ready to explore, to discover new places, and to find new adventures. When I returned from my trip, I would come back with stories to tell, memories to cherish, and a renewed spirit. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, with an open heart and a fierce determination. In the end, I learned that betrayal, while devastating, could also be a catalyst for change. I had taken my pain and channeled it into something positive. I was ready for the next chapter of my life, a chapter filled with resilience, hope, and the promise of new beginnings. I felt strong, empowered, and ready to face whatever life had in store for me. The future was bright, and I couldn't wait to see where it would lead.